Hello, hello, and welcome to another podcast episode of Overpowering Emotions, where I talk all things big emotions, emotion regulation, self regulation, resilience, all of the things. We know that self regulation is a really broad construct. I'm on this little self regulation kick right now because it's really the crux of everything that we talk about. And it encompasses a range of important skills, a lot of which involves those executive functions, right? The last part of the brain to develop in our prefrontal cortex. Self-regulation, it's really a manifestation of those executive functioning brain-based skills. I've talked about recently in previous episodes that it's this sort of dynamic process. It's being able to manage our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors so that we can organize our behavior, control our impulses, solve problems, do what we need to do to reach our goal, whatever the goal is, right? So we're steering our behavior towards a desired end state. It could be specific behaviors, thoughts, attitudes, emotional states, all of those types of things. So within that overarching idea of self-regulation, there's different domains. And each of these domains are important, and each of these domains can be used as a point of entry into intervention. Shanker identifies five different domains that includes stressors. But really, when we talk about self-regulation, there's three key domains that we really focus on. And so the first that I'm going to be talking about is the cognitive regulation, right? So that's the ability to plan tasks, prioritize them, focus on them, pay attention, solve problems. It's really those goal-directed, higher level cognitive processing brain-based skills. So it's the top-down control exerted over the lower level cognitive processes. So this means that kids are purposefully, voluntarily, they're using volitional processes to direct their own behavior towards whatever that goal is, right? So they're overriding any automatic or immediate sort of gratifying responses, right? They're overriding any impulses like, I really want to do my iPad, but I know I'm supposed to do my homework or things like that. Oftentimes, this domain is discussed interchangeably with executive function, which of course are those attentional processes that allow us to guide our behavior and allow behavior to vary from moment to moment based on whatever our goal is in that moment. But remember, self-regulation is a manifestation of those executive functions, which involves a collection of those different processes. So it includes working memory, being able to remember, right? What is it that I'm supposed to do? And consequences, attention, paying attention, thinking about those consequences, responding, in a way that's helpful rather than impulsively, managing those impulses, being able to think flexibly, being able to shift perspectives and take different perspectives, to adapt flexibly. If this isn't working, recognizing it's not working in the first place, but then being able to shift, whatever it is that I'm focusing on and adjusting our own behavior based on what it is that we're supposed to be doing. So the inhibition of overlearned or prepotent responses, if we're going to be using both behavioral terms, it really gets in the way of kids being able to be successful. So it's managing their impulses, because if they've already blurted out something or hit somebody or screamed or freaked out, I mean, it doesn't matter what those other skills are because they've already sort of broken what they were supposed to do because they were responding impulsively. So the best measure is seeing what happens in the real world, right? For sure. You could do things though, like, asking teachers or parents, right? To ideally in a group, you can kind of see. So clap when I say meow, but don't clap when I say woof, right? For example. So at first it's really easy, but then if we're saying, like the teacher says meow while holding up a picture of a dog or says woof in a silly tone or changes it up, kids have to override the automatic association that dog equals woof, right? And they have to focus on what the teacher is saying. Or you can play something like red light, green light, where they run on green light, but they stop on red light. Excitement, especially when they're in the group, and that's why, in the classroom, it's so great to do this. But if you've got a group of kids, that excitement and that momentum, it makes it really hard for them to stop, especially if their goal is to be the first to the other side. So they have to inhibit their prepotent response to keep running, that automatic response to want to keep running. So, children who struggle with self-regulation or impulsivity, for example, our ADHD kids, they often have trouble with those types of games. I never won those types of games, right? Especially because I was also competitive, which we know our ADHDers definitely are, and they just want to make it to that finish line. Another common example that we see in this day and age, probably all of us, right? Especially as we're getting older, is the notifications, right? The pop-up notifications. So if you've got a kiddo who's trying to study, but they're also trying to ignore those pop-up notifications, that can be really tricky. Same thing for you, right? If you get a notification, there's this strong urge to check what email came in, what text came in, what app is giving us this notification, right? Those are built to catch our immediate attention because they want us online, on their app, on their device as long as possible. So in case you're doing something else, beep, beep, like it just sends out that surge of dopamine. And so resisting that urge to automatically check it and being able to return or maintain our focus on whatever it is we're doing, on our conversation, on our schoolwork. I mean, that's an example of suppressing an automatic response in favor of a goal-directed behavior. But if they haven't inhibited that response, they're already off task, right? And so you can see that that can be really problematic. If you have a teen who sees a provocative comment on a post, right? They want to reply instantly, and it's usually maybe out of anger or resentment or just attack, right? But if they stop themselves, well, the success to be able to stop themselves really depends on that inhibitory control under emotional arousal. So there's lots of skills here, right? Because we know the emotional brain is so strong and it usually overrides, it takes over so that we do respond impulsively. Now, if we look at this dual system model of regulation, I'm debating whether going into all the different models of self-regulation. There are a few, but if we look at the dual model of self-regulation, the cognitive regulation is typically housed within system two. If you know about the hot and colds, right? It's really the system two is the cold system. And I mean, this is really simplified. Like I said, there's different models to consider, but the cold system is really the slow, deliberate, reflective, responsible sort of system for those higher order mental operations like making good decisions, making good judgments, setting long-term goals, creating strategies or a pathway to meet those goals. And again, resisting those immediate urges. So it's kind of like saving their money for a car, right? They know that they want to get a car, they're turning 16, they want to get it, right? So they're thinking about their future self eventually versus, oh, I want that new video game right now. Right? It just came out. Everybody's talking about it. I want to get that. So it's using up a lot of those cognitive resources and it becomes very vulnerable being overridden, especially if we're tired, if we're stressed, if we're unregulated. And so we see that ourselves too, right? You might have good intentions and hold things together all day if you're on a diet, right? You don't want to eat all the junk, but then at the end of the day, you're stressed, you're tired, and there's a bucket of ice cream, right? It's hard when we have all of those emotions going on. System one is the hot system. It's fast, it's automatic, it's emotional, it's impulsive. So that's linked more to the emotion, the reward, the immediate reactions. And it's usually triggered when we're stressed, when we're tired, when there's huge emotions going on, when there's temptations. We see that hot system sort of dominate when kids are emotionally charged, younger kids, right? Any big sort of emotional situations. But the two systems are supposed to be constantly in dialogue, right? And kids can effectively self-regulate when that cold system can modulate or override the impulses of the hot system. I always love showing the marshmallow experiment. You can YouTube it, right? Just marshmallow experiment. And so kids are offered one marshmallow now, or if they wait, they get two marshmallows. So the hot system is the one that's going to say, eat it now, yummy, get it, what, I want it, ah. The cold system is going to say, wait, two is better than one, right? Those kiddos who can engage their cold system, maybe they're finding some replacement behavior. They might be distracting themselves, they might be sitting on their hands, maybe they're singing, right? They're trying to find a replacement behavior to eating that marshmallow. They're more likely to delay gratification now And we know over time, they're actually more successful as adults if they can delay that gratification. They're using those resources. Okay. And so this is really sort of important sort of things that we can start looking at. But it's not just about willpower, okay? Because we have very finite, limited resources of willpower. It's not about willpower. It's all about those executive functioning processes. And it shows how the emotion regulation and the cognitive control, they're really intertwined. That cold system can weaken really easily when kids are tired, when they're stressed, when they're hungry, when they're feeling those big emotions, when there's little motivation, there's little reward. That's why rewards can be really helpful. And so if they can wait, if they can plan, if they can, remain in the calm sort of state, even if they can do that, they might lose all control under social pressure. So it's not a lack of skill either. If there's a skill deficit, cool, we're going to work on that. But it's not necessarily a skill deficit, it's just a temporary override of the hot system. So the cognitive, I think I've beat it over the head. You understand it. It's the cognitive control, but the emotion regulation is the ability to monitor, evaluate, modify our own emotional responses so that they're appropriate for the environmental demands. And so I can respond appropriately. But when they get overwhelmed, it overrides all of the systems. So that emotion regulation really involves identifying the emotional responses, deciding, do I need to regulate? What strategies do I need to use to regulate? And then actually implementing those. So it's very important for development, for social success, for psychological well-being, for mitigating any risk with future, mental health problems, emotional challenges. If kids have poor emotion regulation, we it's really a transdiagnostic risk factor for all sorts of internalizing difficulties like sadness, low mood, depression, anxiety, as well as externalizing disorders. Those are the behavioral disorders, oppositional defiance disorder, all of those kinds of things. And that's why I focus so much on emotion regulation. When I do all of my workshops, it's specifically about doing emotion exposures and emotion regulation. These are the skills that we need to build because they override the cognitive system. And we see that it affects their, diagnoses. It can contribute to overall decreased well-being, especially as they get older into adulthood. And so this is really what we need to target. Right. And so focusing on that emotion regulation, they really develop a lot during the adolescent years, which, by the way, when we look at adolescence, goes well into the 20s. It's not just teenage years, right? It goes well into adulthood. But we do see the shift in their reliance on the parental support to more of their internal regulatory processes. But they still need good co-regulators, even if they're adults. So we really need to be mindful of that. That's important. And if parents aren't able to regulate, it's a lot harder for kids to regulate. And that's why I focus so much on working with the adults in kids' lives. Now, emotions are really important because they have this dual role, right? On the one hand, they can support self-regulation, right? So for example, self-conscious emotions like guilt can actually motivate kids to follow social norms. Feelings of pride can really help reward persistence. So there are these emotions that can help us guide our behaviors to reach the end that we want to do. But they can also interfere, especially strong emotional states, right? High energy behind them. Anything that's related to desire, to pleasure, to reward seeking, that can really interfere with the ability for the brain to self-regulate, right? Because it's such powerful motivations and it pushes us, to act quickly. So it's not just about what we call, I'm going to be talking more about pleasant, unpleasant emotions. We want to use that language instead of negative and positive. But even what we would consider pleasant emotions, positive emotions like excitement, can really inhibit some of our self-regulation too, because now we're getting overwhelmed, we're getting overly silly, and now we're, breaching boundaries and we're disrupting the class or whatever else. So all of these emotions, they can really activate the hot system, which is wired to go after what feels good immediately right now. And so that can include getting out of something scary, right? I want immediate relief, getting out of something that could be embarrassing immediately now. So it's very strong compared to the self-control, the self-regulation, which lives in that cold system. There's a major problem, though. We have this quick fix society. We've built where food and dopamine stimulation is readily available everywhere. I'm hungry, I eat something now. I'm craving something, I eat it now. Or I can get Uber Eats to bring it to me now, right? We don't have to wait and hope for. Um, I'm bored, I can get stimulated right now, just with any screen, right? And so we've got these sort of appetite emotions. They're strong. They easily pull our attention away from what our goals are, right? It's reducing awareness of risks. It's overpowering that cold system's ability to say no, hold on, right? That's the whole point of the cold system, the prefrontal cortex, is to wait, hold on, let's think rationally about this. But if you have a kiddo who's told that they can have their iPad after their homework, but then they see their iPad charging right there, that appetite, that drive kicks in, and now the iPad becomes so hard to resist because it's right here. Or I just got a notification. I'm just going to check it for one quick second. Even though they know the rule and they sneak the iPad anyway, not because they're bad or manipulative, it's because their desire hijacked their self-regulation, self-control system. If you've got that teenager who's doing their homework, but they keep getting texts about a party or maybe photos on social media, their desire for connection and FOMO, the fear of missing out, that stirs that appetite, right? Stirs those strong emotions. So even if they intend to focus, they had good intentions and they know how to study, the pull of the phone, it's overriding their self-control. And we know research has shown, even if you have your phone off, but it's in your study space, it's on your desk next to you, your brain is still sort of hooked into that phone. You actually need that phone completely away. They know it's completely inaccessible for them to be able to focus. And if it's on, well, now they're going to start impulsively scrolling or texting, even if they're going to regret it later, even if they know they should be doing something else, even if they know better, right? And so that's why helping kids regulate behavior, it's not just about a stop and think strategy. So many strategies out there are stop and think. There's so much more that requires, and that's why it doesn't really work. They need to recognize when their hot or cold system is on, right? Are they in a state that they can self-regulate well? Are they in an environment where there's not so many high reward temptations? Are we building in delay gratification skills? Are we practicing emotional awareness? Can they name and manage those desire-driven sort of states? I will be getting into interventions and some of the skills, and I want to be talking about the functions of different emotions. That's really important for kids to get, to understand and for us to understand as well. But we really want to emphasize why a lot of what we're doing, why a lot of those strategies just aren't helpful, because emotion regulation involves a range of conscious and non-conscious, unconscious strategies so that we can increase, maintain, decrease components of the emotional response. So we really need to talk, get into that. I do a lot of self-regulation workshops, and all of my attention is on that emotional brain. We just don't talk about that a lot. Well, we talk about it and we do cockamamie things, but then we're always giving kids cognitive strategies. We're trying to target the cognitive brain, which just isn't as strong as that emotional brain, right? Because when those emotion-driven emotions are coming up, it's short-circuiting that self-regulating brain. It's overwhelming the slower, deliberate thinking, right? And that's really common, especially in our kids and teens, and especially teens where that regulatory system is still under construction. Okay, so we've got our cognitive, we've got our emotional, and now we get to the third piece, which is the behavioral self-regulation. And so that involves being aware of our actions, of our impulses, and managing the impulses and the actions that we want to do, managing them in a positive way to match maybe behavioral expectations or to reach those goals, whatever the situation is. So it's the process when kiddos are initiating, adjusting, interrupting, stopping, changing their actions to make sure they're satisfying the goal or maintaining current expectations, whatever those are. So they need to resist those highly emotional reactions, keep their calm, self-regulating thinking prefrontal cortex online, handling frustration without outburst. They need to avoid inappropriate, maybe aggressive actions, right? And just maintaining positive interactions with others, carrying out self-directed learning. So it's stopping to be able to manage their impulses, refraining from going on the iPad when they're not supposed to, refraining from checking those notifications when they're trying to study. But it also includes initiating sort of long-term congruent behaviors. So getting into the habit. It's all about building habits, getting into the habit of always doing my homework before going on other devices. That can be really helpful. We just want to automate things so they don't even have to think about it. We don't even have to activate the cognitive system. You just don't think about it. Like for me, working out, it's just a habit. The first thing I do in the morning after I do my bathroom stuff, I'm putting on my workout clothes and going straight to work out. If I wait till later, the chances of me working out, like after 7 o'clock, the chances of me diminish significantly because I start getting tired or I start getting busy, right? Other things start going on. But if you make things so habitual, you don't even have to think about it, that can be really helpful. Now, the domains aren't isolated. I'm talking about them in isolated ways. They're very interconnected and they operate in this integrated sort of way. We know that rethinking a situation helps us manage our emotions if the emotions haven't become so overwhelming in the first place. A parent's cognitive flexibility that can really influence their emotional responses and their disciplinary behaviors, their behavioral regulation, right? So if they're stressed, they're more likely to punish their kids than if they're calm and able to validate, and do all of those things. So, having that understanding of the different domains can be really helpful so we can start looking at the different interventions. Because, like I said, any of those domains are a point of entry into the interventions, which I will get to. And I'll start getting into those interventions for next week. I'll leave it there for today, but that's something we want to start thinking about. But you can see why I focus so much on the emotional brain because it is the strongest and is the most likely to override everything else. So I will leave it there. Check out the show notes for more information. I hope you have a great day. Help those kiddos be bold and courageous, and I will talk to you next time.